I think we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll let folks filter in. And I really hope everyone is enjoying this third day of CoMotion LA. As someone who was born in LA and currently lives in LA, I've had a great time and really excited for this panel. Appreciate Alex coming all the way from Miami. I think it's been really cool actually to see the contingent of Miami folks and experts and policymakers, Triple C up here in the stands, everyone. And it makes me want to go back to Miami again for CoMotion Miami. So appreciate that. Today we will have Alex, who's the CEO of the Miami Parking Authority, Samuel Jackson, who's the Senior Director of Product at Lacuna. Sorry, I knew I should have checked my notes. And then also Marla Westervelt, who's Head of Policy at the newly named Commission on the Future of Mobility. Do not get the name wrong or she will get mad.
Coalition for Reimagined Mobility, but close.
Is that what I said? Oh, okay. You know what? That was the old name.
Yeah, that was the old name. But we had to have a name that matched our ambitions. So now we have it.
So this is very embarrassing because when I was reviewing the notes, I wrote down the old name when they specifically told me to write down the new name. So sorry about that.
I'll forgive you.
But really excited to chat with the three of you. And I want to quickly just let each of you explain kind of what you're up to at each of your organizations. So Marla, since I messed up your title the worst, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. So I'm Marla Westerville, and I am the Director of Policy at the Coalition for Reimagined Mobility. We are a new coalition of CEOs and former policymakers working to develop policy solutions that better prioritize people and the planet. So we're looking into both the movement of goods and people. Our two primary topics at the moment are looking into freight digitalization, as well as how to reimagine market regulations for passenger transportation.
Very cool. Sam?
Hey folks, Sam Jackson. At Lacuna, for those of you who don't know us, what we work on is helping cities to help commercial movement to move better, whether they're moving people or goods. That means both to manage, monetize, measure, but also it means helping to manage infrastructure like a loading zone or a curb and help all that system to work more effectively together. And my job is to help build those things and help listen and learn with everybody here.
Very cool. Alex?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us here all the way from Miami, where we think it's freezing over here because it's 80 degrees and 85 in Miami. We're going through really exciting times. Those of you who were here to hear the mayor speak this morning, it was nice for him to come and join us. I'm pleasantly surprised at CoMotion LA. I've only been to one CoMotion in Miami, and it was such a smaller scale than this, and I'm blown away by what I've learned and seen here. And I'm really interested in bringing a lot of this back to Miami, whether it is the shared vehicles or the bots, or even the EV tolls. Everything that we have seen here and experienced is things that we want to work on. Curb management is something that's very important to us. The congestion is becoming, like in every city, we're all struggling with that. And so we have put in place already some things that are helping us gather more information and data as to what we need to better the system that we have in Miami. And what we have found is that data is very powerful, and it helps us realize that maybe what we think is not what is really happening. And so I think our job is to be practical as a government entity. And sometimes we don't put things in place that are practical. So I think that with the help of what we've learned and people that we're working with, we'll be able to do that and do that at a very, in a fast pace, so that what the mayor wants to do in Miami and really, put forth the tech also involves transportation, which is one of the things that really impacts the community.
Very cool. And, I think I'm most excited for this panel because we do sort of have the trifecta here of mobility and someone like yourself, Alex, who's working for the city of Miami, and Sam, obviously at Lacuna, which is a private company, and Marla over there on the end, who's got a ton of experience on the public-private partnership side. So I think we've got a really cool panel for discussion here. And I kind of want to start at that point, Alex, because I think, nothing against some of the cool technologies here, like unmanned aerial vehicles that I did sit in and take a picture in, but these topics, that you just kind of hit on, I mean, driving down the streets, access to curbs, parking, these are things that everyone cares about, and kind of not only everyone cares about, but actually uses every single day, right? Like literally everyone who attended this conference has already experienced some aspect of getting here or parking or, eating lunch out on a parklet like I did today at the ramen shop, which was pretty good. So I would love to start, kind of with that data piece. What is it that the cities are looking at right now when it comes to data, and what do they have at their disposal, I guess, to make these decisions?
So I think that, in my industry, in the parking industry, it's been, we've talked a lot about, it's like every 2 years there's a new buzzword, and curb management is the buzzword of the day. And I think that we're moving away from it being a buzzword to actually putting it in practice. Like, what is curb management and how are we going to get there so that we can better manage our curb? So we, low hanging fruit for us is technology. We have sensors on the ground in specific areas of the city that provide data. Right now, we're just gathering that information. That is not to say that whatever we decide to move forward with always you have to put policy in place. You have to have the legislation formed, and then the legislative body has to approve it. So I think that education plays a big role in us to be able to be successful in doing any kind of management. And Sam and I had a long conversation about this last night. The public and private marriage has to happen. And so for us right now, we said, let's put some sensors in place, and we have a camera in place. And what we're finding is no matter, we have 15-minute loading zones and nobody takes 15 minutes. Everybody's at 20 to 30 minutes. So here we are. I mean, in Miami, we tow UPS or we tow FedEx, which doesn't make us very popular. We're not popular, period, because we do enforcement, we give tickets, we tow. But for us, it's proving a point, and it's changing the behavior. And it's bringing them to the table to speak to us. And it's taken us a little bit to get there, but they are coming to the table so that we can try to figure out what is it that we could put in place so that everybody could abide by the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, one of the things that I was mentioning to Sam, and in my, I've only been the CEO for 2 years, but I've worked in MPA for 15 years, is that we no longer can really look for solutions that only impact Miami. I want to look for a solution that impacts the country. And we're an authority. I do have a lot of freedoms that a lot of parking departments don't have. And so I think it's our duty to put forth things that other people may not have the money to do. And so they're waiting to see what we do, if we succeed or fail. And hopefully we'll be successful. We could package it, and then, different parts of the country could also use it for their cities to be successful.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that concept is really important. Also, kind of why conferences like this bring folks together and kind of understand who's trying what, who's piloting what. If you have, hundreds or thousands of parking authorities all over the country, it probably doesn't make sense for them all to try the same thing or even a few different things. So have a few leaders there. I think when it comes to folks, especially, I guess using the pandemic as an example, right? We've seen a lot of accelerated changes, right? I'm curious, it seems like data is important. You talked about curb management as a big buzzword. Is data sometimes kind of a crutch though, right? It's like, oh, we need the data to this. Do we really need the data to understand, that like there's been a huge explosion in last mile delivery, that those UPS and FedEx trucks are everywhere. They're blocking parking lanes and bike lanes and, kind of causing all that chaos. What do you think?
So you're right. Data sometimes is an eye opener.
Put you on the spot.
It's an eye opener. It's an eye opener for us, and we're going to talk about, I'm sure, congestion pricing soon. Again, I'm telling you, we could have done this last night with this crowd. We should have invited them to hang out with us. But one of the things that we found, we put legislation forward. Like 4 years ago, we went before to get our rate changes, and we put in there, dynamic pricing. This percent, we're going to charge this, and it was fantastic. Except we've never been able to roll it out, because when we started seeing the compliance and what was going to trigger the dynamic pricing, we never met the threshold. We just put it in there. Nobody really read it. The legislative body really doesn't understand it, which is part of the issue. And now I'm realizing, because of the data that we have, okay, that's not going to work. How do we really do dynamic pricing or congestion pricing so that people can get off the streets, get into our facilities? And maybe the approach isn't just to pass legislation. Maybe it is, how do we market? How do we educate the public? How do we incentivize them to come into the garages, lower rates, so that they become comfortable with that. Oh, it's so much lower. I could park for $5 the whole day, as opposed to doing the circling thing that they do all over the streets. So that's what it's provided to us. That data is going to help me now shift from only pushing something on the street to the public and them go against me. Then I actually encourage them to join us, to come into the garages, get out of the streets. And once they have that comfort level, maybe I'll just take my time to go.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like the data is important, right? The concept on paper might often sound good, but then selling it to the public and sort of, and even, seeing how it actually works in real life. I mean, I think this is common with a lot of tech products and a lot of the stuff that, I look at, everything looks great on a PowerPoint, and then you get it out in the real world. And sometimes it's a little more challenging. Marla, I know that you've done a lot in the public and private side. I'm curious if you have anything to add.
Yeah, absolutely. I think historically data has been a crutch, right? We would get in data, it would give us a lot of insights, then we make decisions based on politics. So we don't even use the data, it's just an input that's there. But I think that what's happened in the last couple of years is we're not just looking at data for insights, but to feed into tools, much like the tools that Sam's company has developed. And that creates a brand new opportunity that makes data a lot more interesting and makes it more actionable. So I think through that progression, the data conversation has become more important, and it opens up a suite of opportunities that we didn't have a few years ago.
Got it. Very cool. Anything to add, Sam?
Just if we think about this $1 trillion infrastructure package that just was passed, a lot of data is going to be used in that case to say what's going to happen over the next 30 years. Let's spend a year, 2 years, 5 years studying that question, spending a lot of money on concrete, and then maybe measuring what happens later. And what anyone would find if they actually checked is that a lot of those estimates are wrong. And so the more you can use things on a shorter timescale as well, I think is the really important question. It's not just, can you understand the problem and then decide, implement new technology, but can you have a technology or a tool or a policy that itself has more feedback loop?
Yeah. And I mean, I think one thing too that I often hear, especially, from the folks on the city planning side, is that, they can't always think about, today. They also are planning for the future, right? Like, what is the next technology that's coming that's going to disrupt or change, right? And so even though in the moment, right now we're talking last mile delivery, ride hail, impact on the curb, things like that, there are other things to be prepared for. So if we take a step back, I'm curious, what do we think, sort of the state of congestion, whether it's on the streets or the curb, like where are we at today? I mean, I think, again, with the pandemic, right, there was, a few months there where there was not much traffic and everyone was happy and talking about how great it was. And it seemed like in LA, at least things are back to normal, at least when you're driving the street. So Alex, where do you think we're at in kind of a high level?
So we are very different than the rest of the country. And I have many conversations with my my peers throughout the state, throughout the country. And we are back, our revenue numbers are back to pre-pandemic numbers. I mean, we are exceeding our pre-pandemic revenue. So how's that? Except my garages, I have no one. My numbers are not even close to my pre-pandemic numbers. So what does that tell you? People are back on the street. They're not coming into the garages. When we saw that happening and that the pendulum really was not swinging the way that on-street did, we started offering freebie, which is like an electric shuttle, free rides. So you can park all day in the core of downtown for $5 and then take the little shuttle and it takes you anywhere you want to do within the core. We started offering long-term parking, very inexpensive for those who are traveling to Miami. As you all know, Florida is very open. So we're getting a lot of tourism and we're offering long-term parking. It forced the hand for us to think outside of what we typically have. And so I was mentioning to Sam that if as opposed to taking my approach now is try to lure those people to understand that parking off the street is easy. Get into the garages, take the transportation that we're offering to get you from point A to point B without you having to go to the congestion, traffic. And so what I've learned from this pandemic is it's interesting people's behavior, like the consumer's behavior.
It's interesting too. I mean, it sort of makes sense, right? If, more people are getting things delivered, if more people are taking Uber and Lyft, or more people are taking scooters, right? There's going to be less folks parking. And I mean, so I guess that, like, what's the impact that then has on the streets? I mean, I guess that's kind of negative, right? If there's more people, more congestion, and, this is the perfect segue into our congestion pricing that is the focus of this panel, right?
If you're looking at me, I'd say, I think, yeah, the congestion is part of it, but I'd go with the first four words here, the price of everything. And I'd say the price of everything is wrong. A lot of the time it's too low. Sometimes it's too high. And congestion is a consequence of that. But congestion should not be the cause for changing the price. It should just be one of many factors about what are the outcomes that we want.
So the physical act of driving is pretty much free, when you're on the roads, right? But I mean, I guess parking does cost money, right? Is that what you mean?
Sometimes, I mean, 95% of New York City parking is free, right? And New York City's real estate is pretty valuable. And a lot of cities, that's the case. San Francisco, 600,000, something like that, free on-street parking spaces. So all that aside, I think that's our question here is how do you change the price to get the right incentives? And managing congestion might be one, but whether it's free flow or not, if there's a big truck going past with sulfur particulate emissions, kids are going to get asthma. People are going to get lung disease, respiratory problems, whether that truck is idling or whether it's going fast. Idling may be worse, but it's still bad.
Yeah.
So while I couldn't agree more that we are not pricing things properly, I don't think that that's a sufficient explanation of the problem, right? Because if we price the roads and we don't have alternatives, we aren't going to get anywhere. You look across this country and we have a lot of need to develop more robust mobility networks, right? Whether that is privately or publicly operated, I don't care. But we in most cities across this country, if we start pricing the roads, people are still going to have to drive. And so I do think that we need to really be focusing on that investment, focusing on how do we create this mobility marketplace in a robust way. And that also helps to grease the wheels for the politics. I will also add to that end, we just passed this infrastructure bill, which did not necessarily do enough for transit. So per usual, that puts a lot of pressure on our metropolitan regions and cities again to say, okay, what do we do about this to create the space to start pricing things appropriately?
Well, how do we solve the time mismatch between those? Because even if today we said, let's build out a transit system for everywhere, could be decades, right?
So I think that that's where the partnership between the public and private sector comes in, right? So if we're going to build a subway system or even a light rail system, that takes forever. But there are lots of other mobility options out there that we can do today. So for example, I used to work at a scooter company. It's really easy to bring in a scooter company and deploy hundreds and hundreds of scooters each day. Right now, we're not necessarily creating the regulatory structures that incentivize those companies to operate in the public interest, in part because operating in the public interest is a money-losing business. So you're going to have to create subsidies. So I do think that there are ways to say what are lighter weight approaches to start to meet people's mobility needs. And then we can start to play with this pricing as people have options and alternatives other than their solo driving option.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can even stick on scooters for a second because, I mean, I think the fact that, there are, real, I think in my mind, I was actually one of the first bird chargers in Santa Monica. So
Awesome.
I picked up my fair share of scooters at the expo line, dropped them off in what a bird likes to call nests at 5 a.m. Did not like the job, but have done it. And, I think that there are a lot of positive potential, whereas with ride hail, also done that job and, picking someone up from a train or a bus station at 5 p.m. and trying to do a first last mile connection to ride hail is like the worst idea I've ever heard. So I'm curious, do you think it was kind of like because cities were maybe burned by ride hail, now they're like, hey, scooters are coming in, same people, same kind of vibe, same approach, but oh wait, there's a lot of positive potential here with scooters.
You're giving me PTSD. Yes, absolutely. I think that the way that we reacted to scooters was a function of companies that came before the scooter companies and how they behaved. Also a function of the fact that a lot of people who started the scooter companies worked at those companies that pissed everyone off. And I also think that we had an original sin with scooters where we had companies like Bird come in and say, hey, we're going to be so profitable that we're going to pay you $1 a day for the opportunity to use your public right of way. As it turns out, though, these companies are subject to the same transportation economics that everyone else is. And so that doesn't end up penciling out. So I think that we are still working through kind of this historical trauma and maybe decisions that were more short-term as we try to think about, well, what is a regulatory structure that actually aligns public and private interests and ensures that these companies can be profitable, because that also is a necessary component of success. You need to have economic sustainability if you want the company to be there delivering rides for your city, you know, tomorrow in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years.
Yeah, I think that's a really important aspect of the public-private partnership. And it's easy to look to, you know, companies in the new mobility space that have maybe raised billions of dollars, right? And say that, wow, they're rich, they must have so much money. But as they get closer to an IPO and then actually IPO, right, the unit economics and the sustainability, right, $1 per trip, or, you know, even like a lot of cities are tacking on ride hail fees, scooter fees, things like that can really add up. Alex, I'm curious, in your work, you know, are there public-private transportations that you feel that, you know, you've done a good job or that you've observed and you think sort of move some of these goals forward?
So we partnered with Revel. It's electric mopeds, and they are a direct contract of ours. They didn't go through the city; they went directly through us. And so they've been a phenomenal partner as our first partner of micromobility. Actually, we had car share a long time ago, and they were here for a little while and then they left. It was a shared car company, and I'll tell you, not only the Rebel was a good partner in that, they also had a community component. And so if you are under a certain threshold of, you know, economically, they do give you a huge discount on the pricing, which allows for anybody to be able to access these mopeds and get to work and have the same opportunity as anybody else. First responders, when the pandemic happened, they gave free rides to first responders. And so what I started thinking was, if I have a chance to partner with these micromobility vendors, I think it would be our responsibility to make sure that in our contract, there is a component for the community where we are being able to reach those that otherwise probably wouldn't be able to afford it, and are the ones that need the last mile trip, or they need to get into the city, or they need the equal opportunity as well. And so that was my first real experience with a company, micromobility company, because they typically go through the city. And I'll tell you, with scooters, one of the things that I don't think some vendors get right is if we were good partners and we could, and they could abide by regulations as well, we would have a better marriage. In Miami, scooters haven't been very popular for many, many reasons. And I think in part is the city's fault. The way we rolled that out was not maybe the right way. And then we had a chance to roll it out again, and it was not the right way. And I'm you know, I'm not criticizing it. You know, you got to take your lumps when they're yours. We're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I don't manage it, the program. And my staff would cringe if I told them I wanted to do that. But I don't want to kill the program either, because I do realize that a lot of people do get around in the scooter. So why kill it? Why not roll it out the way we were supposed to? Why don't we bring them to the table? Why don't we do it at smaller scale and then grow and make sure that we're forcing the hand? And I think that's the government's job, is to make sure that they're all successful. You can't always be throwing wrenches at the vendors and saying you're going to fail, because then they will.
Yeah.
And so I think that I'm trying to take some of those things on that are not necessarily under my umbrella, but I know that it will help long-term with transportation in our community.
But I think part of that is also bringing subsidy to the table, right?
Yeah,
you know, if these companies are coming in and providing free rides or discounted rides, they're taking a loss on that. And, you know, that's part of their near-term business strategy, and that's fine. But, you know, from a transportation planner's perspective, we're again thinking long-term and how to make this continually economically sustainable. You have to make them whole. And I think being able to have that conversation with operators would be extremely useful to start to change this game, so that we can think about this as like a true fabric of our mobility options, and then, you know, move towards the holy grail of congestion pricing, which we're all hoping for.
Well, I think it's also, and you're right, it can't always be give me, you know. We really, if you really want to be a true partner, and I think that's what people miss out on. That word partnership is really thrown around all the time, and it's like, what does constitute a real good partnership? And so sometimes you do have to set monies aside for this if you want to be successful. And so I think that's a struggle that, and I see it in politics all the time. I've been in government for longer than I want to admit. And so I don't have that mindset. I think in part is because I'm very lucky that I get to be very autonomous in what I do. But I do see that. And if I take off that government hat and I put the private hat on, you got to carve some stuff, the money aside if you want to make this work, if you really want to make change. And that's where I think there's a big gap everywhere.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think just to finish on that, I think your point of being able to figure out how to make both win and also risk share, because that's what partnership's about.
Right.
Who is best positioned to manage which risk? And how do we set up our contracts or regulatory structures to that end? And again, this is really, really hard, and it's not conversations that the private sector really is trained to have, the public sector is really trained to have. But I think it's really important that we as leaders in the industry are pushing towards having the tough conversations and figuring out how to push it forward.
Yeah, I mean, Marla, so I mean, really the opposite is kind of happening right now, right? I mean, right now, scooter companies and ride-hail companies, if anything, are paying fees. And I think if anything, like that demand for those fees are, probably going up. I think, the companies are being asked to pay more than they were in the past. You're sort of proposing a 180 on that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very bold.
I mean, and to my previous point, it is the scooter company's fault for coming to the cities and saying that we'll pay you for the opportunity. But we do need that 180 if we wish to have these options in the future, and if we wish to have a robust mobility network that is not 100% publicly operated and on really long time horizons of construction.
Yeah. And I mean, I think too that, when it comes to these companies operating, and I think thinking about the fact, right, that the goals of a private company are very different. I would almost say, again, 180 opposite, right? I mean, I think that, we've written articles in the past, on the Uber side, right? If you've looked at, where drivers are actually incentivized by the companies to drive, right? So where Uber, the company, is telling drivers to drive in the city of LA, and you line that up with a map, socioeconomic status, like big surprise, they're telling you to drive in West Hollywood, in Santa Monica, in the South Bay, in downtown, right? They're not telling you to go south of LA, right? And so I think the city, has different goals, right? Maybe some of those, but, then balancing the equity and the access. Sam, I'm curious if there's, like, I guess I use that example as something like, I think it's kind of like there's data, I think that's actually already out there that, you can literally like go be a driver for these services and start to see, oh, the company's telling me to go in these services.
Well,
right?
I think if you understand what's going on, you can then
Yeah.
do something about it. And so I'm staying at a hotel 2 miles away from here. If I were to request a ride with Uber or Lyft, it costs about the same to take a car with me and the driver as it does for me to take a dockless device. So we might look at that and say, maybe $8 is too high for me to take a small electric vehicle versus to be in a car. But that might also mean that $8 is too low for that car ride. And the problem, I think, is that a lot of folks out there want to get the subsidy for doing something good, but don't want to pay the price if it turns out that vehicle is contributing to the congestion downtown or endangering the safety of a kid walking to school or whatever it might be. And so you kind of have to have both. And similarly, if we look at the whole transport system and unsilo it, then you might say, yeah, the city or the MPO or whoever can look and say, what's the most cost-effective way to help people get around? And then let's allocate the dollars accordingly to that. But I think people only want to have that math on one side of the ledger, because it's dangerous if you do the real math.
So for us, when we partnered with Revel, we partnered with them. We said, if you win, we win. And if you lose, we lose. And that's how we started. And that's where we are still, because in the pandemic hit, I mean, we've only been with them for a short time, but we could have said, well, we want X amount and we want this percentage of your revenue. And we said, we'll do a share. If you do well, we do well. And if you don't, we don't. And that way it incentivizes them to do better, and it incentivizes us to work with them. And it was a great structure. It's been probably the best structure they have, and they've always been very grateful for that. And I think that causes a very true dialogue and a true want to do good for us and for the community. And I think that's why we have been very successful.
What are the specifics of the structure? How does it work?
So the percentage of revenue that they make, they didn't know what we were going to ask for. Are you going to ask for 50% of our revenue, which is what people go in, cities want to go in because they're parking on your street. So they're not parking on my street. So, oh, you're not parking on my street. You need to pay me $3 an hour. But that structure doesn't work. They'll absolutely fail. So they don't have to park. They don't have to pay to park on the street. But as they go increasing, and so they started at a smaller, they wanted to go up to 700 mopeds. They started with 350. They have teetered going up and down, but they've never even gotten close to that number, especially because that pandemic hit. So they were very smart in their growth to make sure that we needed to make sure that they were taken care of, that they look good, that they were charged. They have to have the helmets. I mean, there were so many requirements. And so when you put those many requirements onto a company and you want them to abide by it, you can also tell them, hey, and I want 75% of your revenue. I mean, it's not going to work. And so we have let them grow. We need to let them grow and be successful. And then we'll have the discussion some other time, and we said, listen, let's circle back. We circle back quarterly, and then we circle back once a year. We really do, when we go to sit down, we see all their numbers. So it's really been like a true business,
Are they making a profit?
They are doing a lot better than what they had expected. And it's funny, I look at the numbers and I'm going, well, this is not bad. The amount of, what, for me, it's the amount of trips tells me a lot that people are actually using this. If I told you what the numbers were, revenue, I'd be lying, because when we report, I report on a monthly basis so that my board is aware of what's happening with. I don't report the number of revenue. I look at the trips and how many people are actually getting on these. Are they being utilized? It's a good program. And everything else will come. If you really want to do something for the community like that, where people are getting around and they're getting off the street from their vehicles, then you can't always be looking at the bottom line. You have to look at the bigger picture, and that's bigger picture. Do you need to make your money? Are they parking on the street? Yeah, absolutely. Are they taking up an entire space? No. So what is it worth to you? Is it more the money, or is it more what you're offering anybody in the community that is able to use this? I'm very surprised. I'm also surprised by the circulator. So we're paying for the circulator. Nobody's paying for that. There's nobody, we're taking the money that we're, from our revenues, and we're saying, let's reinvest it back into the community. And so these little circulators, people they just stop, they'll hail them down and then they'll get on them. They're free. And they take you from point A to point C if you wanted to, all over downtown Miami. It's amazing. And there's a lot of artists that have come down now, that Miami's become a hub for that. If you see how many pictures they take in those little circulators, I'm thinking, how the hell did they even get on this thing? But it's interesting that we are providing that. So I'm going a little bit away from parking, and I'm realizing that we are, providing a service that maybe the city wouldn't have the money to provide, but I can with the revenues that I'm making. And it's not only about getting revenue and put it in your pocket, is what do you give back? And so we're kind of tilting. I was talking to my IT director, he's in here somewhere, Henry, and I was talking to Carlos, and we're very good partners with the county. And these are the partnerships that we have to do this, folks, because if we don't do this, our cities are never going to thrive. Everybody wants to talk about how great their cities are, but if you can't get people from point A to point B and people can't afford it, then, how good is that? How good does that make you as of a city, So I'm hoping I could contribute to that.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think very exciting stuff. And, I will say we're going to have probably a few minutes at the end for questions. So start thinking about your questions right now, and we'll probably take a few in 5 or 10 minutes or so. I think actually like what you're describing here with Revel is like really exciting. So I kind of want to stick on this point for a second. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm a little scared of getting on a Revel moped scooter, but are there other solutions, Sam or Marla, that you think are out there that you've sort of seen you're really excited about, or that you think really will move the needle? Because I think it sort of seems like, some of the issues, we want to get people out of cars, right? Moped kind of obvious, scooter, I think also obvious in my mind, right? But what other solutions do you think that, are sort of realistic and here today, or you've seen work in other places?
I mean, I think that there's a huge form factor conversation to be had, right? So in this country, we have our kick electric scooters. We all thought they were kind of crazy when they first went on the streets. I'll be honest, before I started working at the scooter company, I did not think it was a real transportation option. Just thought it sounded like a fun job. And now it's one of my favorite modes of transportation. I use it for commuting. I use it, for recreation. I use it for whatever. And it really helped to start to change my mind. But, you look to Europe and you see many more electric 2- and 3-wheelers. Maybe they're vehicles that give you some protection from the elements. Maybe they're vehicles that allow you to have, your child or your groceries in the car. And I think starting to figure out how to bring those form factors to this country and operated services could be a huge win. There are a lot of barriers to that. There are regulatory barriers in terms of what our vehicle specifications are. There, then of course, are the barriers we're also talking about in terms of the economic sustainability. But I think those barriers can be overcome if we really start to look to these options as a way to build out the menu.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I think we have chatted before about the concept of mode shifting. And I think one thing that I've seen, sort of like since I've been doing this for not nearly as long as you, Alex, only 7 years in my case, but, I've seen a few trends come and go. It does seem like there's something important to be had to take advantage of things that are hot. Right, like e-bikes right now. I think that there's been a lot of articles. New York Times had an article about the growth of e-bikes, 159%, growth in the past year, sales, right, off the charts. Even, and this is United States we're talking about here, right? So I really like the concept of like latching on to like it's, 2 or 3 years ago, it would have been hard to get people to ditch their cars for an e-bike, but now, like you get people onto an e-bike and their friends are doing it and everyone's talking about it. So is e-bike the mode that we should be thinking about to get people off the streets? And
I mean, e-bikes are awesome.
They are really fun.
And, you look at utilization of e-bikes over an electric scooter and it's always higher. But I don't think that they're sufficient, right? A two-wheel electric bike is a one-person experience, an able-bodied person experience. It's hard to have your groceries on the vehicle unless, you're using a backpack. So yes, and we also need to figure out how are we meeting the needs for all of these other trips. And, coming back to the female trips of taking your children, taking your groceries, all of these trips that we haven't historically prioritized in our networks.
And I mean, I think it kind of gets back to, the fact that, especially in a lot of situations, I mean, frankly, like the car is the easiest way to get around. I've got 2 kids. I go to the grocery store, so that resonated with me. So, I mean, kind of circling back to, the topic at hand of congestion pricing. I mean, first of all, I never have really liked that term. I'll be honest. It sounds like a bad thing. Shouldn't it be called decongestion pricing? Or, I mean, what is there a marketing aspect here that we need to change? How do we convince people that stuff like this is good?
Yeah, definitely. Any ideas here in the audience? I mean, use pricing is one thing that people call it, but you could call it the stop kids from getting asthma fee, any number of things. And sure. And in different cities around the world, it's called different things. But I think to that point, I don't know that a new pod or, electric sled dog or something is going to be the answer. I think the bicycle has been around for 150 years. Adding a motor is good. All those things are good. But it's how do you make the relative other price of those choices better? So it's not, maybe you pay $0 to take your bike to the grocery store, but then you pay if your bike is at risk of getting stolen. You pay when you go to the hospital because there's that pothole and no bike lane or whatever else. So cities have those options at their disposal too, which have the relative effect of making your car trip maybe more expensive or more costly in time or something else like that, which is the flip side of the price directly.
Got it. Interesting. So we've got a few minutes left here. I've got plenty more questions that I can ask, but I'll turn it over to the audience for a second. If you do have a question, raise your hand, yell it out once I call on you, and I'll repeat it for the panelists. And if you do want to address it to a specific panelist, that's always helpful so that then we don't have to hear them all answer the same question 3 times. Let's, Brad, I see you with your hand up.
Yeah, I'm going to back it up. I believe for a long time we could want people. When I've talked about how to do that, the city, the answer that's come back is the city makes in some cases 3 times as much money in violation side than it does parking. So it's not all motivated.
So we are an anomaly for that. We do the parking enforcement, and I get 0 revenue from citations. My department doesn't. The city does. And so we have changed the way that we do our parking enforcement, in that we started making our parking enforcement officers ambassadors, teaching people how to make payments at the meter, we don't have meters anymore hardly in Miami. We only use pay by phone, so a mobile technology, and so we are teaching people, and in that teaching, we are having conversations with the public. Look, it's a very hard thing to do. I don't know if I could do their job, and then ask them to not only do their job but be ambassadors and teach people how to download the app and make the payment, because what we want is the revenue, and that we could use the revenue for better things than just giving it away and putting it in a general fund somewhere, and then you never see that money and where it goes to, which is what you get when you get a citation. So that's how we are dealing with citations in Miami, where we're just having our enforcement officers be ambassadors. So every time they're going to issue a ticket, if somebody's coming to the car, we hold the ticket, we tell them, listen, why don't you make a payment? You have to download the app. I mean, we have 95% of the people using the pay by phone app, our revenues are 95% from pay by phone. So that is we're the highest adoption in the United States. And that is a testament to the staff and the culture that we built, and then forcing the hand and the education. And so I think education is a big part of what cities don't want to do. They just want to throw something out there and you say congested pricing and they're like, okay, well, yeah, you think people are going to adopt that? They won't. They will just, and in Miami, I'll tell you, you pay $6 to park in front of, they'll pay the $6. It's how do you get them off of that? How do you educate the public to not do that and come into the garages, which are very, very centrally located? How do you get the private? So I'll give you a great story. We have areas in our city that we don't charge for parking because there's no need. There are underserved areas too that we would kill the businesses there. The few businesses that they have there, we pay parking. But the private operators have come in and they're charging for parking, but we hardly have parking lots in those areas, but they're coming in and they're charging an enormous amount of money. We get a lot of that feedback, and I'm thinking, if we don't change that mindset, even with the private operators, and we start working together, it's going to be it's a tough uphill battle, because how do you tell a private operator, hey, I don't want you to charge, that amount of money? They could charge whatever they want. And so we're trying to continue to have those discussions so that a community as a whole is better served. But this is an everyday education process, and that's what we've become, like educators for the community. I hope that kind of answers your question. Okay.
No worries, Brad. I know you've always got lots of good questions, so she will be available after the talk.
We could talk after.
Run and grab her. Right behind Brad, I see a question. Okay, so the question is from Paul, and it's, should we be talking about governance first and foremost, basically, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Next question. No.
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, governance is obviously one of the hardest things to change, but I think you're right. It is the biggest barrier. So we look at Los Angeles County, for example. We have LA Metro, which has jurisdiction over the full county and distributes money out to 44 transit agencies. We have 88 cities. One of those cities happens to be Los Angeles, one of the biggest cities in the country. Los Angeles is a weak mayor system, so then we have to deal with all the council members. The number of decision makers in the room is insane. And that's just one county in our country. And you look across the country and everyone has their own unique governance situation with a suite of trade-offs. What I think that we have seen historically, though, is when you try to create a new governance structure to solve a problem, we've seen that happen in Minneapolis. We've seen that happen with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, that was specifically designed to not be political. Ultimately, all these bodies do become politicized. And so I think that it is wise of us to figure out how to work within many of the governance structures that we have. If, to Sam's point, we want to do this quickly, because changing a governance structure is going to take about as long as it's going to take to build a subway system.
And I mean, it sounds like you said there's trade-offs, right, in all of these governance systems.
Absolutely. Everyone has trade-offs. I did a study I don't know, maybe a decade ago on transit governance of metropolitan regions. And you start having these conversations with people and they say, our governance is the worst. Here are all the reasons why it's horrible. And then you start to tell them about everyone else's problems. Like, all right, maybe my governance is okay. You know, I'll take the demons that I already know.
Well, I've heard a lot from Alex so far how hers is the best. So can you briefly explain? I mean, you mentioned that it's an authority. I actually don't know what that means. What does that mean?
So we are run by an independent 5-member board, and they're private citizens, business owners for the most part, and so their mindset is different. They don't have a political agenda. They just do what they feel is, and vote for what they feel is right for the organization and for the community. So you know, when you cut off all the other stuff that sometimes the politicians have to, those sandboxes that they have to play in, you know, you're left with really good decisions for the most part.
And how are they elected, and what are the decisions?
They're self-appointed.
Okay.
They're self-appointed 5-member board. We've had our board members for quite some time. And so, you know, we have an array of board members. You have a finance person, you have a real, you know, somebody who's real estate, someone who is an attorney. So we try to keep a little bit of a developer, like we try to keep all the facets of what we touch on our board, so that we could be represented. And if there's any questions, you know, there's always somebody who has an expertise. But the city still has an oversight over our, you know, on certain things, over our agency, whether it's our rates, our rate ordinance, they ratify our budget, they ratify our board members. And there are items that we're still very convoluted with the city. So I always try to do my homework very much so before I take it before the city commission. If I have to take it because it has to be amended, because the code has to be amended by them. As a matter of fact, I've worked very closely with the county, and the county being the bigger of the three-headed monster, they allow for us to do a lot more and be more flexible than the city does. So city's home rule, and at the end of the day, we have to open up those communication levels more so with the city. And in order for me to do that, they have a trust in me and as their parking authority, that if I bring something to them, is because I think it's good for the community as a whole. There's a lot of banter, there's a lot of education that has to happen, even with the politicians. And you have some forward-thinking politicians, and you have some that are not willing to budge. And sometimes you have to start carving out areas, which is really ineffective, I think, because you have to try to do this as a whole. It does affect parts of your city. So look, this is what I spend a lot of my time doing. So I really think very tactfully about all these, you know, mobility options and how is that going to affect our code. We have to change a lot of these things. We want to do congested pricing. So we took a stab at it, and I'm like, oh God, we have to go back and change it, because it's not good. What we wrote, it's not great. We've never even been able to put it in place. So just the thought of having to change that, it makes me lose sleep at night, but we have to do it. And you're right, it's not the easiest. That's the hardest part of this, is putting things in legislative body is and putting this in law is the hardest part, to get them to understand it and approve it, and get the customers, the residents, to understand it as well and vote for it. So I'm not telling you it's easy. Anything that I can control is much easier, but nothing that's in law, unfortunately. Even as an authority, the city has that code over me.
Well, one thing on that, to the other question, I've seen a lot of permitted entities that they're more willing for a lot of these things than say a resident might be, who've said, if you gave me the ability to reserve curb space and I pay X dollars in fines, I would pay X dollars in reservation fees. Now, maybe actually they should be paying 2X or 5X or something, because there's a lot of value in that. But that is a very different conversation, maybe, than just change the price of the parking or optimize those things. So I think sometimes cities should recognize the options that they have to create new value, and that can help make a different conversation for some of these things.
Cool. So I think we've got time for one more quick question, if there are any in the audience. Okay. Hey, how are you?
Mhm. Mhm.
So the question was around congestion pricing and basic carrot or stick. Getting the right reasons, yeah, to move folks off. Okay, just want to repeat it for the virtual audience so they can hear it too.
I mean, so for me, you hit the nail on the head. I could only talk about congestion pricing, and I could see us doing that in the core, in the CBD of downtown Miami. I can't do that anywhere else because I don't have a parking resource. So if I forced a hand anywhere else, I'd be forcing people to go into maybe a private garage that is charging, $20 an hour. So how is that helpful? I can only do that where I have my facility. So in the CBD, in the heart of downtown, I have 4 garages. I have over probably 7,000 spaces, actually 8,000 spaces. There's a lot of spaces in the 4 corners, and I'm using a circulator. So there's no excuse. You could come in, you pay $5 for the whole day. I have a circulator that I provide for you to go anywhere you want to go in the CBD. See, that's carrot stick. If I go down to another part of, I don't have that situation in any other part of the city. So when I'm talking about congestion pricing, I'm talking about the CBD. You're right, I don't have that anywhere else. So I'll just be forcing you to find parking somewhere else that I can't control. And so, I'm laser focused on the things that I can control, because the things that I can't will take a lot heavier lift. And unless the community partners, the private operators don't start, doing the same with us, the same thing as we are doing, they don't realize that you'll get a lot more people in if you can really incentivize them to come in. People don't go into those garages. We have a lot of parking. People don't realize how much parking there really is. Everybody says, oh, there's no parking. There's plenty of parking everywhere. And there's a couple of areas that don't have. But if you don't continue to incentivize people to come in, you're right, you may be paying actually more and you're just making money on the street and you're making money in the garages. So that only goes for me if I can actually incentivize people to come in and I provide them with the tools that they need for them to come in and for me to get them from point A to point B. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You're right. You have to have a structure. You have to have a facility that you can actually, move people to. As a government entity, I'm also forced to push the prices down so that the competing forces also have to push their prices down, because if not, they won't go into their facilities. Is that the case? Have we been successful doing that? Not so much. I spend a lot of time promoting and educating the public on our facilities. We do that all day long through social media and advertising. You don't know how much money we spend on that just to try to educate the public. And we do that all on our own. We really don't get a lot of help from, not from the city and not from anyone else. So we have a whole campaign that we do around that, but that's us putting our best foot forward so we can actually get people off the street.
Education seems important.
Yeah.
Any final words, Marla, Sam?
I was just going to add on to that and say, whilst in this country we do have conversations about congestion pricing as a way to raise revenue, sometimes that is a great political tool to be able to open up the opportunity. So while I don't think that should be the goal, I think that we should be creative in the ways in which we get folks and places of power to agree to try new and challenging things.
Cool. Well, really appreciate the panel. I think this is actually the last panel for this stage. We've got a little hydrogen chat later over on the main stage, and also an LA mayoral debate. So that should be fun.
Ask them when congestion pricing will come.
Yeah, I think some of these questions might be applicable to that debate. So really appreciate Alex from the Miami Parking Authority, Marla, the Director of Policy for the Coalition for Reimagined Mobility, and Sam, Senior Director of Products, Lacuna. I think you can look all of them up online, LinkedIn, Twitter. I know at least Marla's on Twitter and a few other places. So really appreciate everyone coming out, and thank you very much to the panel.
Thanks all.
Thank you.